I had a lot of questions this morning about, or I say a lot of questions. A lot of people commented. Let me put it that way on the announcement sheet on what was on the front page, and people were saying that they needed some of that, or they were wondering how to get some of that motivation, or what actually entailed of that motivation. That's what we're going to talk about this morning. Okay? And when people are asked, what is it that motivates them to go to work every day? Probably the number one answer. When is your boss here, Terry? Oh, is she? One of them is. Okay. Okay. Most people respond by saying, I have an alarm that vibrates sitting by my head. Don't they, Leanna? I'm going to pick on Leanna about this morning. But I do it for my family. Or like the majority of you said, for the money. I have to pay the bills. Right? Or I get to see my colleagues. I mean, y'all go to work so you can see your colleagues. Or I love my job. There's a lot of moaning and groaning going on around here this morning. Golly. But it's what I do. It's my daily basic deal that I do. It's just what I do. So what's your motivation? What's your motivation? What compels you to get out of bed every morning? A desire not to be late? A desire to get a head start on the day? What compels you to eat? Is it hunger? Is it taste? Is it what you paid for that meal that you're going to eat it regardless of whether you like it or not? I paid this much for this, I'm going to eat it. Right? When you go to church, what compels you to go to church? Is it God? Your spouse? Your kids? Maybe it's your ministry. Or maybe you have a need for social interaction. Or maybe is it guilt? There are several people here by themselves. They didn't come with a family member. They didn't come with a spouse. They didn't come with anybody. They came by themselves. There's actually quite a few of you. If I get to looking and counting, I can't just name one or two. Well, what's your motivation? What's your motivation? One of the big challenges within the church is to stay motivated. We become bored, don't we? And we lose our enthusiasm. Last week I shared with you that we need to rejuvenate our zeal and get a fresh vision for our mission. What was another word for zeal? You remember? Enthusiasm, energy. We become bored in church because we lose our enthusiasm. Boredom, has it always been a present day issue? present time issue? I don't think so. It was Reverend Robert South. Reverend Robert South, while preaching one day in 1689, a few years ago, looked up from his notes to observe that his entire congregation was fast asleep, including the king. So rightly shocked by this, he interrupted his sermon when he called out, Lord Lauderdale, arouse yourself, man. You are snoring so loudly that you're going to wake the king. So maybe it's the speaker that has made it boredom. I don't know. But we've gotten so bored in church, we've lost our enthusiasm. We're going to go to Philippians chapter 1 here in a minute. But first, how can we take a bored, unmotivated Christian and transform him or her into a zealous, cheerful, happy believer? The answer is motivation. Soaking them in enthusiasm. The Bible contains many examples of motivated people. Those who achieved goals. Those that persevered through struggles. Those that were very generous. Abraham had a clear goal to find a wife for his son Isaac, didn't he? And he believed that God would help him. Nehemiah had a plan to rebuild the wall, and he received a letter from King Artaxerxes. Say that 3 times real fast. King Artaxerxes. Yeah, I said it wrong that time, didn't I? That he got this letter to ensure his safety and that he would get the building materials, the lumber, the timber that he needed. Jacob set a goal to marry Rachel and came up with a plan to work for her daddy for 7 years. But he got ripped off, didn't he? He had to work a few more years than 7. Joseph used his God-given gifts of dream lead the people during a famine. David spent time with Saul's attempts to kill him. Job persevered in his faith even after losing everything. And Paul, he boasted about suffering. Noah built an ark to save himself, his family, and many animals when God decided to wipe out humanity. These guys were motivated. They achieved goals, they persevered through struggles, and they were generous. Many Christians want to get rid of their reluctance, their shyness, and give their heart totally and spend totally and devotedly to God, completely to Him, but exposed to half-hearted Christians hold them back. Sometimes all it takes is the example of one serious Christian seeing them gives us the permission. It gives us the permission to step out. To step out of that fear and to jump in with both feet. When a serious believer goes beyond the call of duty and make use of themselves to the glory of God, others are motivated to empty themselves for God. Serious Christians bloom. They bloom, they mature where they're planted. Now let's look at Philippians 1. We'll start at verse 12. We'll do 12 and 13 here. It says, I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me here has helped to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I am in chains because of Christ. When we find contentment, knowing God is working. Look at verse 12 again. It says, everything that has happened to me here has happened to spread the good news. It was a progression of the gospel. We are to be, as Christians, we are to be looking out, looking around for ways to further the gospel, aren't we? This gave Paul time. Him being in prison gave him time to contemplate and to write the prison. Some force is in our best interest. Sometimes we're too tired to be motivated about anything, aren't we? Instead of viewing his imprisonment, him being in prison, instead of viewing that as a defeat, a setback, he saw it as an opportunity. We should be searching for opportunities to use circumstances for the kingdom. Look at verse 13 again. Everyone here, including the whole palace guard, he was taking an opportunity of that. Paul was chained to a different guard that were won to Christ, probably encouraged their friends. They probably encouraged them to take a shift, to be chained to Paul so they could talk to him. Now, the palace guard was an elite group of troops. And as these guards traveled through different parts of the country, they could carry the gospel that Paul had shared with them in prison, chained to them for 6 hours. They could take this gospel and they could spread it. They could carry it to whomever or wherever they went, couldn't they? So what do we have access to? Those guys just have access to a horse that carried them from here or there. And that's how they spread the gospel. We have access to social media. We have access to that thing hanging there from the ceiling. We have access to reach all kinds of people. Everyone knew that Paul was in chains for Christ. Not because he was a nut, not because he hated the government authorities, not because he was a social activist, but truly for Christ. And the lesson we can learn here, we must never let circumstances get us down. Paul never let any of his circumstances get him down. Never let them defeat our testimony. Never let it defeat our witness for Christ, no matter what they are. They could be persecution, failure, divorce, sin, abuse, imprisonment, loss of a loved one, rejection, age, poverty, bankruptcy, financial loss, or maybe an accident. If we are living for Christ, we must know that God is in control of our lives. He will strengthen us to bear whatever circumstance falls upon us. Serious Christians accept that our faith carries a price tag. Let's look at verse 14. Chapter 1, verse 14 and 15. It says, "And because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak God's message without fear." Verse 15 says, "It's true that some are preaching out of jealously, and rivalry, but others preach about Christ with pure motives." This brings out the best of us. This brings out the best of brothers and sisters. Look at verse 14 again. It says, "Most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak about God's message without fear." When believers suffer for their faith, it motivates other believers. You think, well, that's kind of funny sounding. Believe it or not, it makes them bold. It gives them confidence. It makes them unafraid. Fear strips us of many things, doesn't it? Now, I had a dentist appointment Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday, wasn't it? I had a dentist appointment Wednesday, and it was at 20 till 10. I was getting in my truck and leaving. Now, I was shocked. That was fast. You know, he sat down there and stuck that little cotton swab in there with that numbing stuff on it. And, usually they hide the needle from you. He's just waving it around and carrying on. Just talking. And, yeah, this is the second time I've seen him, and this particular dentist. And he was just talking and rattling. And finally he stuck me one time, and then he just talked. He said, well, we'll let that sit there a little bit. And I thought, I hope so, because I can still feel stuff going on in there, I was rolling my tongue around. I said, I can still feel it. He said, your tongue's not going to be numb. I said, okay, that's good. And he grabbed another needle, and he was sitting there waving it around and carrying on. I thought, come on, dude. I'm glad I'm not allergic to needles or anything. The dentist does not bother me. Katie you can say the word dentist to her, she just freaks out. They got to give her one of those little pills so she'll just calm down, just even go in there and get her teeth cleaned. But anyway, I'm getting off here, but I'll get back on this there in a second. But he waves it around, and he She hits me again with that other needle, and directly out comes the drill. And, he's still talking and the flapping and going 45 minutes, 40 minutes. I'm in and out. And I think, man, this is all right. But then I get here to the church, and I'm drinking some water, and I'm drinking it with a straw, and I suck it up there with the straw. When I pull the straw away from my lips, it shoots out of my mouth because everything is still numb up here. It's kind of funny looking, but no, not really. But anyway, one woman tells a story. She tells a story about the business, this busy dentist office that she works at. And I'm talking to you about fear strips everything. Fear can strip many things. But believe it or not, when we suffer for our faith, it builds boldness and confidence in other believers. So this woman is fear strips everything away from us. This woman is working in her busy dentist office. And one patient was always late. And I was hoping this wasn't me because I was running late. I had to go all the way to Grove. And I get behind 3 dump trucks between here and Beatty Road. And I thought, don't turn, don't turn, don't turn. They turn, go down Beatty. I follow them all the way to, I don't know where. They're just putting along. So I call the dentist office. I say, hey, I'm on my way, but everybody this morning wants to drive 35 miles an hour. I'm coming as fast as I can get there. So as soon as I got where I could let her rip, I let her rip. But I got there on time. But this guy was always late. He was never on time. So once when she was calling to confirm his appointment, he told her, he said, yeah, I'll be at that appointment, but I will probably be about 15 minutes late. That won't be a problem, will it? No, it sure won't, she told him. We just won't have time to give you any anesthetic. He arrived early. The number one reason we don't share our faith, more is often out of fear. So what are we afraid of? Are we embarrassing ourselves? Are we afraid of not having the right answers? Having to be on the defense from then on? Are we afraid of being left out? Are we afraid of being laughed at? Being misjudged? Are we afraid of offending others? What overcomes fear? Motivation. Love is one motivation. Self-respect is another. A heart to do God's will is yet another motivation. Some of us may be motivated by compassion. In 2018, these are all facts that I got off the World Wide Web. In 2018, a Chinese pastor was one of 100 Christians detained by authorities after he was reportedly arrested on allegations of encouraging the undermining of state power. This pastor was. This was some of the government's crackdown on churches outside of state control. And in a separate incident in 2021, Police in China raided a small group of Christian worshipers from a heavily persecuted house church in southern China, southwestern China, and arrested almost everyone there, including an infant less than 1 year old, 9 other children, and 18 adults. So you see, what overcomes fear is motivation. These people had a heart to do God's will, to show it to one another. God has graciously ordained that we suffer. You could see that in 1 Peter 2, verses 20 through 21. For most of us in the U.S., the suffering has been minimal. Mostly it's social pressures. God nowhere tells us to seek suffering, though. But we Americans do not know how to suffer for our faith. We've had little experience. Whether we are persecuted or not, we must remember the Christian life is more of a battleground than it is a playground. Some are motivated by envy. This brings out the worst in the competitive and the ruthless. I start to say restless. I don't know what that means. Look at verse 15 again. It's true that some preach out of jealousy and rivalry, but others preach about Christ with pure motives. Ezekiel 4, verse 4 tells us, "Then I observed that most people are motivated to success because they envy their neighbors. But this too is meaningless. It's like chasing the wind." Some people are competitive. And you know, it's easier to direct rather than rejecting these people. Paul recognized that God could use them despite their sinful attitudes. Although motivation differs, the word was spread, wasn't it? Look at verse 16. It says, "They preached because they loved me. For they know I have been appointed to define the good news." Verse 17, "Those others did not have pure motives. As they preached about Christ, they preached with selfish ambitions, not sincerely, intending to make my chains more painful to me." Verse 18 says, "But that doesn't matter. Whether their motives are false or genuine, the message about Christ is being preached either way." So in other words, it was getting spread, wasn't it? Regardless if they were doing it out of the right motives or not, it was getting spread. even out of competitive and selfish ambitions. Churches can work together. They can work together with other churches. And I had pastor's breakfast yesterday morning, and it's one of the things that we deal with all the time, is getting pastors involved. You know, we're all in this together. We're all in this for the same purpose. We're all in this to preach Christ. Amen? God often grants us periods of rest, doesn't he? Look at Philippians 1, verse 19. For I know that as you pray for me and the Spirit of Jesus Christ helps me, this will lead to my deliverance. Paul had assurance. He had an assurance that God would deliver him from prison. Perhaps he had a revelation from God. But the next time around, Paul would give his life for Christ. Now, it's tough sometimes, isn't it, to be motivated to serve the Lord? Sometimes it does get tough. We all gravitate sometimes toward room temperature, don't we? Being lukewarm. So how do we get motivated? How do we stay motivated? We can get motivated by focus. Let's look at verse 20. For I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed, but that I will continue to be bold for Christ, as I have been in the past. Should be a prayer for all of us, shouldn't it? And I trust that my life will bring honor to Christ whether I live or die. Verse 21. For to me, living means living for Christ, and dying is even better. Verse 22 says, But if I live, I can do more faithful work for Christ. So I really don't know which is better. Verse 23 says that I am torn between two desires. I long to go to be with Christ, which will be far better. Our focus should be to glorify for all of us. But remember, this is the answer to what it's all about question. Paul's motto can be found in verse 21 again. For me to live means living for Christ. And dying is even better. Christians shouldn't be afraid to die, should they? But we're usually not in a hurry, though, are we? Wanting to get to heaven when we can be serving God here on earth may seem a little selfish. Paul was in a hurry, though. It didn't matter to him. Probably because of his life situations, his life's moments, and all the trials and the suffering that he went through. But as you read his scripture, one way or the other, he was good with it, right? Focus often creates motivation. People get motivated about things by sheer concentration. They concentrate on independence. They're motivated by recognition, by power, by prestige, motivated by money, security. Whatever you concentrate on gets your attention and your interest, doesn't it? So that's what motivates you. We can be motivated about serving God by concentrating on the things of God. So how can we stay motivated? By focus. By reading our Bible. By studying it. By prayer. By church involvement. These are all crucial. We are motivated when we feel we are needed. Quote by Charles Kingsley. We act as though comfort and luxury were the chief requirements of life, when all that we need to make us really happy is something to be enthusiastic about. We need to help people. We need to help others to make progress. Because many Christians stubbornly think they can grow independently from other Christians. But they miss so much because of their stubborn determination to isolate themselves from the rest of the team. What motivates people? That's a trick question, isn't it? You see, you can't really motivate people. People motivate themselves. You can give them incentives. Bless you. You can give them goals. But we all know that those external motivations only last for a short time. So if you really can't motivate people, what do you do to get people moving towards the goal, the vision, the very purpose of the church? It's simple. In our presence, which is getting a little harder and a little harder to do in today's virtual world. COVID created a world of people believing that they didn't need the fellowship of other believers. It created a people that believed that they could do church in their PJs. All they had to do was watch it on TV, watch it on their phone, on their tablet. We are motivated when we are surrounded by those we love and those we care deeply about. God has designed the church so that each of us are incomplete. Our fellowship, our being together, our communicating with one another, our camaraderie, it's a big word for Jimmy, makes us complete. How can we stay motivated? By experiencing purpose. This church needs you. It needs each one of you. But if you haven't been serving, we've been making it the best that we can without you. Find your niche. Find your spot. It may be a nursery coordinator. We have one, but she may want to retire. It could be a children's church worker or helper. It could be visiting shut-ins or elderly folks. There's some people that still consider themselves part of this church, but they don't ever come. It could be offering to pick up someone that needs a ride to church. It could be working on the grounds around the church. Find your niche. It could be serving in the community. Care and Share is always looking for people to help. And I know Susan was probably the only person that has really been involved. I don't know if Linda's been down there a time or two, but she works. But they're always looking for somebody. Find a niche. Grandma's been down there before. So it's just, there's a spot. Like I said, I was pastor's breakfast yesterday. One of the pastors said he was headed down to Care and Share, or he would be down there next week. Him and his church would be down there. You know, find a niche. There's something we can do to create that motivation, to create that enthusiasm. Working together builds morale and builds enthusiasm. So let me finish with this. Is your relationship with God the most important relationship in your life? Are you dabbling with Christianity or pursuing God with all your heart? Does your faith have a personal price tag on it? How have you paid the price for your faith? Does your example motivate others? Have you ever wondered what you could do for the Lord if only you were motivated? But it sure is worth it. So what's your motivation? What's your motivation this morning? What keeps you going?